I'm Nima Rajan. Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly says Canada will stand with its allies in imposing severe sanctions on Russian officials if Moscow invades Ukraine. Russia has about 100,000 troops across Ukraine's borders, along with tanks and other heavy artillery, but it denies that it's planning an invasion. Ms. Joly is in Brussels for a meeting with NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg as she wraps up a three-country tour that included stops in Ukraine and France. Pandemic restrictions will begin easing in Ontario at the end of this month, starting with the reopening of certain businesses, with caps on capacity and an increase in social gathering limits. Premier Doug Ford says the government is announcing the phased reopening plan because public health indicators are starting to show signs of improvement. On January 31st, restaurant dining rooms, gyms, cinemas, museums, and zoos, which have been closed since early this month, can reopen at 50% capacity. Allowable social gathering sizes will be increased to 10 people indoors and 25 people outdoors. The government is planning to further ease restrictions on February 21st and then on March 14th. A Montreal health authority is being asked to reduce the preventative COVID-19 isolation period at residential care facilities. A committee that represents users in the authority says that with high vaccination rates and the less severe Omicron variant dominating transmission, the physical and mental health impacts of isolating residents in their rooms for 10 days isn't worth it. A Canadian study, billed as the largest single-country trial of the antiviral drug remdesivir, suggests that it could have a modest but significant effect on COVID-19 patient outcomes. The intravenous drug is not yet approved by Health Canada for widespread use. The Canadian research is part of a larger study called the World Health Organization Solidarity, which evaluated the medication's impact on COVID-19 patients in several countries. More than 400 climate scientists and other academics have sent a letter to Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland. They are urging her to ditch the idea of creating a tax credit for companies that build carbon capture and storage facilities. They see the move as a massive subsidy to the oil and gas industry that directly contradicts Canada's pledge to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The scientists say carbon capture and storage is expensive, unproven, and would only prolong the use of fossil fuels. Well, meanwhile, the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers is forecasting a jump of 22% in natural gas and oil investment this year. It expects capital spending to climb to $32.8 billion, marking a second straight year of significant increases in investment. CEO Tim McMillan says the natural gas and oil industry is continuing its path toward recovery. Well, there's some good news for Western Canadian cattle producers. South Korea has lifted its temporary suspension of Canadian beef imports. It was imposed after an atypical BSE case was confirmed in an Alberta cow last month. It was Canada's first BSE case in 6 years and prompted 3 countries, South Korea, China, and the Philippines, to establish restrictions. South Korea imports about $90 million worth of Canadian beef per year. An atypical case can occur naturally in older cattle on rare occasions, while classical BSE is caused by a cow eating contaminated feed. Turning to Yukon, which is declaring a substance use health emergency as toxic drugs push overdose deaths up. The territory reported a record 23 deaths last year. This is a 475% increase from 2019. Health Minister Tracy Ann McPhee says the drugs are killing people and creating a mental health crisis in every community in the Yukon. Minister McPhee says the territory will act to address the emergency, including using a public awareness and education campaign. For the second time in recent months, the capital of Nunavut has shut down its water treatment plant because of a fuel contamination. City officials in Iqaluit say a breach in the system is suspected to have caused residents to smell fuel in their water, with breaches detected last week and yesterday. Iqaluit residents could not drink their tap water for 2 months last fall after it was found to be contaminated by fuel from an old buried fuel tank next to the plant. Federal data shows that last October and November, the waters of the Gulf of St. Lawrence reached the highest surface temperatures in 40 years of record keeping. Fisheries and Oceans Canada also recorded temperatures at 150 and 300 meters that are some of the highest readings since data collection began in 1915. Scientists say the warming of the deeper waters of the Gulf has outpaced projections based on climate change. Stay with us. We'll be right back with a look at tech stocks and the future of the sector with Brendan Caldwell. We'll be back. Technology stocks led another decline on Wall Street Thursday, leaving the Nasdaq Composite down 2.5%. Microsoft, Nvidia, and other big tech companies had some of the biggest losses. The S&P 500 fell 1.4%, and the Dow Jones Industrial Average gave back 0.5%. Industrial stocks did relatively well, though, while Delta Airlines jumped after reporting surprisingly good results. Meanwhile, financial stocks were mixed ahead of quarterly report cards Friday from several major banks, including JP Morgan Chase, and Treasury yields mostly fell after rising sharply since the beginning of the year. Well, joining us now to talk more on the future of tech stocks in particular is Brendan Caldwell, Director of Caldwell Securities Limited. Brendan, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Always good to be here, Nima.
Now, it seems that tech stocks are really taking a beating, Brendan. There was a large Wall Street sell-off yesterday. We mentioned there was another decline on Wall Street today. Why is all of this happening?
Well, there's a combination of factors, very least, not the least of which is it's January. And the market in general and tech stocks in specific have been on a real run since the depth of the fear-based correction of the pandemic in the spring of 2020. They've been going straight up for the last year and a half. So if we're going to take gains in your tech stocks, you were probably going to take them in January. There are other factors as well, the future of the market and valuations and interest rates. But I think that's probably the single biggest reason is that it's January, which doesn't sound terribly scientific, but that's a big part of it.
So considering that a lot of investors have some sort of tech stocks in their portfolios, should they consider maybe selling their technology positions at this time?
I think it depends why they own them. If they were owning them for the big short-term run-up and thought they could get everything out of them, then maybe. But if they don't have a compelling investment reason, and selling them just for, say, tax reasons might not be the best move. What they could do with them, if they are so charitably inclined, is actually take them and you can make a donation of a technology stock to a charity in Canada and get a tax deduction and not have to pay any capital gains tax. So there are lots of things one can do with them. But if you're buying a tech stock, a particular company, whether it's Microsoft or Roblox, because you believe in what that company's doing and are really interested in it and think about there's a future for it, if it's a long-term hold, I wouldn't sell just because it's a short-term correction.
And there's also been a rise in interest rates recently. So do you see if there is any correlation with the sell-off and this increase in interest rates, Brendan?
Okay, well, that's an interesting question, Nima, because a lot of these tech stocks are trading at very high valuations relative to the amount of money they actually make. And the idea is that if interest rates are very low, the fact that they're not going to be making money for several years, those future earnings are not discounted by very much because interest rates are so low, the rate at which you discount future earnings is very low. But as interest rates rise, the more one discounts future earnings when one's figuring out a valuation. So higher interest rates should mean that stocks will not trade at as big a multiple to the future earnings that investors are hoping for. So long-winded way of saying, yes, higher rates, probably not good for tech stocks or other stocks that are at great big valuations relative to the money they might make in the future.
And do you think that this can be compared to the tech bubble in 1999, Brendan? Would you be able to remind our viewers how that played out?
Well, that was an interesting one because that was so what happened was the late 90s, because of a relatively small, infinitesimal financial crisis compared to what we've been through since, the U.S. Federal Reserve flooded the market with money. And what happened was that money went to buy stocks, particularly tech stocks. And the NASDAQ went all the way up to 5,000 or 5,400. Now, what you mentioned Microsoft earlier, what I feel, and I never said this on TV before, but what I feel was the trigger for the tech bubble bursting in the early 2000s was Steve Ballmer, the then CEO of Microsoft, saying that he thought Microsoft was overvalued. Almost never happens that a CEO says his own company's overvalued. And people thought, well, if Microsoft, with all that cash and all that earnings, is overvalued, what about all these, at the time, .com stocks? Flash forward 20 odd years, you've now got a lot of stocks that are trading at very high multiples, as we said earlier, based on future earnings. So I think there is an analogy, but I think the analogy might also be, look what the internet has done since the .com bubble. Look how important it's become to the economy. So too, whether it's blockchain or cryptocurrencies or the metaverse, I think the current, if it is a bubble, the current bubble stocks will have a future in whatever the next virtual or real economy comes next.
Very insightful conversation as always, Brendan. Thank you again. A Chinese state-owned telecom firm is pressing for disclosure of federal information. This to help the company fight Ottawa's order that its Canadian subsidiary be sold or shut down. During a federal court hearing yesterday, a government lawyer defended the move to shield the records on the basis that they are cabinet confidences. After listening to arguments from the government and China Mobile, the court reserved judgment on the matter until a later date. 1 year ago, the federal government informed China Mobile International Canada of a review. It said the business could be leveraged by the Chinese state for non-commercial purposes, such as the compromise of critical infrastructure and foreign interference. RCMP in Manitoba say they have found the bodies of 4 people near the United States border. Mounties say a man, a woman, an infant, and another male believed to have been in his mid-teens were found dead yesterday near the town of Emerson. Police say it appears that they all died from exposure during a blizzard. A search had been called after the Integrated Border Enforcement Team received concerning information from its counterpart in the United States. The BC government is doubling the amount of financial help available for businesses who are forced to remain closed for at least another month due to COVID-19 restrictions. The Ministry of Jobs, Economic Recovery and Innovation announced bars, nightclubs, and lounges, which don't serve full meals, are now eligible for COVID-19 closure relief grants of up to $20,000 based on staffing levels. The grant program initially offered $10,000. The extension and increase will ultimately cost the government another $4 million. Quebec's Nunavut region has moved into lockdown. More than half of the Northern Territory's 14 Inuit communities are dealing with the community spread of COVID-19. The Nunavut Regional Board of Health and Social Services posted a message on Facebook warning that it's just a matter of time until Omicron spreads to all communities. A 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. curfew is in effect across the region, which spans the northern third of the province. A deal has been struck between 4 Vancouver Island First Nations and forestry firm Western Forest Products to defer the harvesting of 25 square kilometers of rare, ancient, and priority old-growth trees. The 2-year deferral includes the preservation of 10 square kilometers of forest identified by an old-growth advisory panel as needing protection. Another 15 square kilometers of priority ancient forests was also deferred through other agreements between the nations and the forestry firm. Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe says his government will submit another carbon pricing plan to the federal government in the coming months. The province's first proposal was rejected by Ottawa last July. Mr. Moe says his Saskatchewan Party government wants regulatory control over the tax on fuel consumption. This, as well as on pricing of industrial emissions from electricity generation and natural gas transmission pipelines. The federal government has stated it won't look at new submissions until next year. Well, there were some tense moments yesterday at Winnipeg Police Service headquarters. A man, doused in flammable liquid, attempted to set himself on fire inside the downtown building. The area was evacuated while officers working at the front desk managed to take control of the man. The building was closed for the day, and police have not said if the man will be charged. The St. John's International Airport Authority says normal operations will continue at the airport at least until tomorrow morning. The firefighters union says they face harassment on the job, and many are staying home to avoid what they call a toxic workplace. Staffing shortages in the airport fire hall forced officials to suspend large swaths of flights earlier this week. The airport authority says talks with the firefighters union are ongoing and a federal mediator has been brought in. More than 1,600 people have answered the New Brunswick government's call for volunteers to help support its COVID-19 response. Health Minister Dorothy Shepherd says she is encouraged that so many people agreed to help provide clinical and non-clinical services. There are currently 342 healthcare workers in the province who are isolating after testing positive for COVID-19. Health officials reported 4 more COVID-19 related deaths and say there are 123 people hospitalized, including 11 in intensive care. A question requiring the answer, "What is Prince Edward Island?" drew a total blank from the contestants on the U.S. quiz show Jeopardy! In a taping televised yesterday, current long-running champ Amy Schneider chose a category within the Double Jeopardy round, entitled Local Nicknames. The answer was, a Spud Islander is a resident of this Canadian province known for its potatoes. Even host Ken Jennings appeared to admit not knowing the question as he relayed the correct response. Stay with us. More news from around the world coming up on Forum Daily News. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is warning that the response by the U.S. and its allies will be swift and severe if Russia invades Ukraine. He appears to be clearing up any confusion after President Joe Biden was heavily criticized yesterday. It was for saying a minor incursion by Russia would elicit a lesser response. Mr. Blinken is in Berlin for a Quad meeting holding talks with diplomats from Germany, France, and Britain. Meanwhile, Russia says more than 140 warships and more than 60 aircraft will take part in drills in several parts of the world this month. That's as Moscow claims the West is plotting provocations in neighboring Ukraine, where the Kremlin has been accused of planning aggressive military action. The maneuvers involve the bulk of Russia's naval potential and will take place in the Mediterranean, northeastern Atlantic, and the Pacific Ocean. Well, people are used to giving to the Red Cross, but now the aid group finds itself affected by some who've taken from it. The International Committee of the Red Cross says hackers have broken into its servers and gotten personal, confidential information on more than 500,000 people. The hack is of great concern to the organization because the data includes info on people who have had to be separated from their families because of war, migration, or disaster. The head of the ICRC implores those involved in the hack to please not share, sell, leak, or otherwise use the data. Security screening devices made by a company with deep ties to the Chinese military and the highest ranks of the Communist Party are raising security concerns in Europe. The NICTEC devices are in use at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, Europe's largest ports, airports from Amsterdam to Athens, and NATO's borders with Russia. While frozen out of the U.S., NICTEC has become the leading company by revenue for cargo and vehicle scanners. A growing number of Western security officials fear Chinese authorities could exploit NICTEC equipment. The first flights carrying fresh water and other aid to Tonga finally arrived. This was after the Pacific nation's main airport runway was cleared of ash left by a huge volcanic eruption. New Zealand and Australia each sent military transport planes that were carrying water containers, kits for temporary shelters, generators, hygiene supplies, and communications equipment. UN humanitarian officials report that more than 80% of Tonga's population have been impacted by the volcano's eruption. Homes were destroyed, drinking water was polluted by volcanic ash, and the single fiber optic cable that connects Tonga with the world was likely severed. The United Nations says food distribution in Ethiopia's blockaded Tigray region has reached its all-time lowest. This while more than 50,000 children are thought to be severely malnourished. It is the latest sign of a growing crisis amid efforts to end the country's 14-month war. Thursday's update by the UN Humanitarian Agency says food aid stocks and fuel are almost entirely exhausted in the Tigray region of some 6 million people. The government imposed the blockade in June 2021 in an attempt to stop supplies from reaching Tigray forces. The director of the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says at least 2.8 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines donated to the continent's countries have expired, citing short shelf lives as the major reason. Africa CDC Director John Nkegasong told an online briefing Thursday that more than 60% of the 572 million vaccine doses delivered to the continent have already been administered. But he said that just over 10% of Africa's population of 1.3 billion people are fully vaccinated. A long-awaited report on sexual abuse in Germany's Munich Diocese has faulted retired Pope Benedict XVI's handling of cases when he was Archbishop in the 1970s and 1980s. The report, released Thursday, said there were 4 cases in which Pope Benedict, then Cardinal Josef Ratzinger, could be accused of misconduct. The law firm that drew up the report said that Pope Benedict strongly denies any wrongdoing. The report also faulted the current archbishop, a prominent ally of Pope Francis, in 2 cases. 19-year-old Zara Rutherford is going into the Guinness World Records book as the youngest woman to fly solo around the world. Her small airplane downed in western Belgium today after a 155-day journey of more than 52,000 kilometers. She wants to inspire the spirit of aviation in young women and girls worldwide and encourage them to take up studies in the exact sciences, mathematics, engineering, and technology. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Tune in next time to Forum Daily News. Take care of Canada. We'll see you next time.